Well, thank all of you for coming this morning. We're going to sort of take our minds for a minute out of this glorious space out here in the mountains where we're surrounded by trees and greenery and put ourselves in an urban state of mind where we think about traffic lights and skyscrapers and closely knit neighborhoods. We're going to talk about what it takes to renew American cities and how important that is for this country to invest in American cities. And we have a wonderful panel with us. All the way on my right is Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. He is from Los Angeles. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Anthony, thank you very much. We have Annise Parker. She is the mayor of Houston. We have Mitch Landrieu, who has come from New Orleans, and we're not going to hold it against him that he showed up without beignets for us.
You don't know, I might have some somewhere.
Because if you've ever been to Cafe du Monde and had a hot beignet, it is something special. I've actually hung up the phone on someone when it arrived at the table. Got to go. Hot beignet.
Thank you.
And to my direct right is Lisa Jackson. She is the EPA administrator. Thanks to all of you. We're here to talk about what it takes to renew American cities, but I'm going to turn this on its head for a minute and ask a very simple question. What does it mean to renew American cities? And Mayor Villaraigosa, I want to start with you. What does it mean?
Well, I think what it means is that when you look around the world, more than 50% of the world lives in cities. In the United States, it's closer to 80. When you realize that since the war in the United States, you saw a diaspora of people leaving cities, going to suburbs. Now you see them coming back. I think they're coming back for a couple of reasons. One, my city particularly is safer than any time since 1952. And you're seeing a trend in cities, they're becoming safer. I think as well, we're rethinking what cities look like. We're focused a lot more on sustainability, on smart growth. LA, when you look at it, was, and Houston as well, they were the quintessential city of sprawl. We grew out. And you had people living 50, 60, 80 miles away from the core of the city and traveling, which is why we have traffic as bad as it is. And now you're seeing we're doubling the size of the rail system. We're creating transit-oriented villages around Hollywood, downtown, Century City. And people are starting to come back for that reason, I think. And when you look at cities, and she mentioned the Siemens Index, 7 years ago, LA wasn't in the top 50. Last year, we were number 7. Because we're focused on, we hit 20% renewables at our utility. We have the most far-reaching effort to clean up a port in the world. One of the toughest building standards, green building standards. So we're doing a lot of things around growing parks, more sustainability, growing transit, and I think people are realizing city life is good.
So when the city is renewed, define that. What does it mean for a city to not just survive, but to thrive? How do we know when a city is on its feet and really up and running and thriving?
I think, well, the other point I was going to make, I think a key to turning around cities is turning around schools, which is why you see mayors around the country involved in schools. I tell people, if a great neighborhood is anchored by a neighborhood public school, a great neighborhood public school, the same with cities. And as you know, that is an area that we still have to work on in virtually every big city. But the question, what's the predicate for renewing a city? I think believing in it. I think people are, in my city as an example, we've gone from after the war, after World War II, kind of a small, sleepy town to a global city. And realizing that we are a world-class city is sometimes difficult for people, particularly people who have been here a long time. So I think believing in your town is important, promoting it, and obviously livability is a key to people wanting to be there.
Annise Parker, what does it mean to renew American cities?
You have to invest in them. You have to invest from the underground up. Cities are about people and about possibilities. As Antonio said, 80% of Americans live in cities. It's 85% of our GDP. We have to put money back into cities. I've spent almost all of my political capital since I've been mayor in putting money into infrastructure. You have to rebuild the roads. You have to rebuild the water and sewer lines. You have to rebuild, you have to build transit so that people can move around. When I say cities are about people, people come to cities for a handful of things. They come to meet other people, to be with other people, to find a mate, to find an education, to find a job. And you have to make sure that as a mayor that you help facilitate that kind of movement. And many of our large American cities, we've neglected the physical infrastructure. Just as we need to rebuild our highway system across America, we need to rebuild the infrastructure in our cities and the educational system.
And that sometimes was a tough sell for you to actually bring people on board when you were trying to do some of this.
Well, infrastructure doesn't happen magically. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes enormous amounts of dollars, and it takes time. Now, it does generate jobs. It generates revitalization. And, of course, the education piece, I don't have a role in education in Houston. We have independent school districts in Texas. I have 17 school districts in the city of Houston, 11 with schools in my city. So some days I wish I had control, and other days I am profoundly grateful that I don't. But we have to invest in those two pieces.
Mayor Landrieu, this is a particularly important question for you and rather poignant given what we've seen in New Orleans, a city that was brought to its knees. I was there right after the storm. I was just there last week, and I've seen how much of the city has come back, but you still have much, much, much work to do. So what does it mean, particularly for New Orleans, to renew that city and to find its path to, the city, to bring the city back to what it once was? And is that even possible?
The answer is yes, it can be much greater than it ever was, and it's absolutely possible. And to great thanks to many people in this room who are too numerous to name, thank you for everything that you've done for the city of New Orleans. I think Antonio pointed out one of the historic issues that the country faced a long time ago. After the war, when the GI Bill hit, people started moving out of the cities. We started building the rings in the suburbs. There was, over the last, 45, 50 years, this kind of amorphous debate that took place about are rural areas more important than cities. When President Reagan came in, they kind of switched the relationship between the federal government and the cities by directing things from the states, and the relationships have changed. Now the world's changing back. What's happening is that a lot of people are moving back into the cities. So, simply stated, cities are where people live and they work, and that's their closest relationship to the government. And in many instances, whether it's the federal government, state, or city government, most of the offices are in the cities. And if you want to argue about big things, you can, but if you want to get somebody upset, make sure that their pothole is not fixed in front of their house or the street light is not working.
No, they're trash.
Or they're trash, or whatever it might be. And so I know I can speak for both of these mayors. I'm sure they get calls at night from some really important people who are worried about world events, but they're much more concerned about whether the street light's working. And so cities have to work. And one of the things that has happened over time that needs to get fixed is this notion somehow that cities can be disassociated financially, structurally, and from a government perspective from the state government or the federal government. And I think we've gotten away from running an efficient government, one that's completely integrated from top to bottom. And so one of the things we've tried to do, and President Obama's administration has been really great about this, is creating models. And a couple of our cities have been working through this new model. It's called Strong Cities, Strong Communities, where the mission is really clear, to completely link together the executive branch of the federal government and the executive branch of the state and city government. So this is what it would look like. So I see Walter sitting over there, who helped lead the Louisiana Recovery Authority, was Louisiana Recovery Authority shirt on. But instead of talking across the airways, we actually sit in a room. Folks from the state, federal and local government. Leason's a great example. The EPA is in our office all the time. Face-to-face meetings between the mayor and the administrator and all of the folks down the road, so that there is no light between us. So we collectively identify what the objective is. Then we come up with a strategy. Then we don't ask the other person to do for us what we should do for ourselves, but we hold them responsible for doing what they should do. And then all of a sudden, you bring in the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, the faith-based community, and you start creating things that never existed before. And it's just really important for people collectively in America to understand that cities really are important. Once you do that and realize that in order for them to thrive and for people to be happy, number one, the government's got to be honest. Number two, the place has got to be safe. Number three, you got to provide an opportunity for kids to learn. And number four, they've got to find a way to get back and forth from where they're going, either by air, road, or water. Really, those are the four major components. And one of the things that we've just gotten away from is having a robust debate about how we're going to invest in that, how we're going to pay for it, and then actually who's going to call the shots. And I think if we can begin to have that a much more robust national discussion, you will see cities, which I think a fairly large portion of people in America live, will begin to be much more vibrant and a much stronger part of the national economy.
Just one question before we go on. New Orleans has become sort of a model and in some ways even a test case for the Strong Cities initiative. Is that partnership happening in New Orleans by necessity because it has to happen that way, or is this a model that you hope to then replicate in many other cities?
Well, the answer is both. First of all, one of the things we ought to question is, why do we do our best work when we're under stress, as opposed to do our best work every day because that's the way we're supposed to do it? New Orleans is a city that was under stress, and water, by the way. And so water is very stressful. When it's trying to hurt you. It can be a life-giving force, and you should treat it that way too. But New Orleans has, back to the second part of your question, has done something really wonderful, and the people of New Orleans are just so extraordinary. For those of you that have been there, you know that New Orleanians are just really spectacular. They have done something really unique, which is to say, I'm not going to go build the city back the way it was. I'm gonna stand up and say that the city wasn't great before Katrina hit, and Katrina and Rita didn't cause all of our problems. But we're going to take this opportunity with the federal government, the state government, the private sector, the philanthropic group, to build the city the way we always wanted it to be. And we have, in fact, become what I call this nation's most immediate laboratory for innovation and change, whether it's the complete reconstruction of our school system. So, Antonio, y'all talked about education. In the city of New Orleans, we have completely transformed the structural organization of our educational system. And it's very complicated how it happened. But right now what's happening is that we're physically rebuilding most of the schools in the city, and the test scores differential between the kids that didn't used to learn and the kids that don't learn is closing rapidly. And that's not a fait accompli that it's going to stay that way, but it is long term. I think all of us would agree. The real anchor for whether or not cities are going to be places where a knowledge-based economy can grow. It is probably the single most important thing that we can focus on. But I think the mayors will tell you there's so much other stuff to do that's immediate. Crime, it's a big problem in some of our cities, and maybe in New Orleans more than other places. But if a city's not safe, it's hard to think about how to learn well. So we have to do all of them at the same time, and all of them are important.
Lisa, I'm going to ask you the same question, but with a slightly different twist. We've seen this extraordinary shift in cities in really the last decade, where sustainability was sort of a fringe issue to now a core issue when people talk about renewing cities. So what does it mean to renew a city, with a slight twist on that question? How did that happen so quickly in this country?
I think it happened because it's sort of common sense. It follows. And let me deconstruct your question just a little bit. I'm an engineer, two-lane engineer, by the way.
Chemical engineer.
Oh, wait. And so, think about what it takes to actually have prosperity, however we define it. So the majority of our nation's people live in cities. The majority of the world's population lives in cities, and that trend is only going to accelerate. So what do they need? First and foremost, they need clean water to drink. You can't survive very long without water. You need the ability to deal with the waste that you make, human waste, and also all the garbage that you make. You need the ability to get around, whether it's to hopefully a job, whether it's to school. And you need to be able to have access to energy. That's actually what cities are. They're a delivery mechanism, hopefully a very efficient one, to deliver those foundations for prosperity. The theory being that if they're delivered efficiently, the more efficiently you can deliver them, the more we sort of grow this economy. Our economy grows from there. The educated folks come up with wonderful innovations, and people have jobs. So to me, with all due respect to all the leadership it takes, and we have 3 extraordinary mayors here, I'm honored to be in their presence and everything they're doing, it comes down to delivery of those things. So back to your question, Michele, about sustainability. Sustainability recognizes that to the extent those things can be done efficiently, to the extent that when we're thinking about our systems for delivering fresh water, or dealing with wastewater, or dealing with garbage, or to the extent we're thinking about transportation writ large, because you can't have a healthy city without healthy suburbs. I mean, they actually go together. And people are going to live where they want to live in the kind of housing they want to. But how do people move back and forth in a way that doesn't result in your blood pressure going up 10 points every time you have to get in your car, or that in my world results in cleaner air, not dirtier air? Those are all problems that actually cities are uniquely able to focus on because of the synergy of people and products, and because people are together. You can think about resilience. So sustainability says, how do we think about building in transportation and housing decisions together where they also affect air quality? Or as we're having discussions, I think, with each and every one of your cities, but most recently we were in New Orleans talking about what we call green infrastructure. How do we deal with water and wastewater issues? Really challenging in New Orleans, but in any city, in a way that doesn't require you sacrifice open space, but maybe actually requires that you increase it. Very popular. Houston has that whole area, which is a beautiful park. I don't remember the name of it, but its main function is somewhere for water to go, right? So that the city doesn't flood. And then it also is a huge community amenity. And I was sitting here thinking, one last plug, if my dear colleague Ray LaHood, the Secretary of Transportation, were here, I saw him last evening, I'll see him tomorrow, or Sean Donovan, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, again, came from New York City. That was what brought us together, to say we don't want to, as a federal government, tell cities how to solve their problems, but we should be a resource, so that when cities come together and say, I'd like to think differently about an issue, the federal government should, at a minimum, not stand in your way, and hopefully should be there as a resource for you.
I'd like
And you have
to
done that.
speak for a second on that. Why the reason why I think the action is in the cities is because, very different from Washington particularly, but the state capitals as well, but particularly Washington, mayors aren't as ideological. They're not as blindly loyal to orthodoxy in the way that you see, this partisan Washington. And that's not only true in the United States, it's actually true around the world. When we were in Copenhagen, all the presidents, the heads of the national governments, were all elbowing each other and pointing at one another to see who could do the least. The mayors were elbowing each other to see who could do the most. We were all trying to be the greenest mayor in the world. And it's a very different mindset than you see in Washington. As an example, LA hit Kyoto. I became mayor in July of 2005. I signed on, about 150 mayors, now more than 1,000 mayors have signed on to the Kyoto standards. And we hit, as a city, the Kyoto standards in October of 2009. By the time I leave, we'll be at 20% below 1990 levels as a city, with all the cars that we have. No matter what the issue, you see that mayors are much more focused on getting things done. Let me give you some examples. Last year, the mayors, virtually every year, we unanimously, Republican and Democrat, pass comprehensive immigration reform. It's not even an issue with the Republicans or the Democrats. We just unanimously pass a comprehensive immigration reform. Last year, we took on the issue of nation building abroad and the 2 wars. And it was the first time the Conference of Mayors had challenged the issue of, wars since the Vietnam War. And we convinced people that this wasn't about the wars, this was about making investments in education and infrastructure. Broad consent that we needed to do nation building here. This year, 240 mayors, Democrat and Republican, signed on to marriage equality. We were the first four, Annise and I, and Bloomberg. And 240 mayors signed on. Oh, Simpson Bowles. Last year we had a discussion, Jane, on Simpson Bowles as a template. We unanimously passed Simpson Bowles as a template moving forward. The mayors are much different than what you see in broken Washington. And the problem with Washington right now, from our vantage point, is they're not partnering with us. I'm spending 40
What do you want to see happen that's not happening?
Well, they finally passed the surface transportation bill. They extended it 11 times. They finally passed it, thankfully, and with a lot of input from us on America Fast Forward, which was an initiative to, in a world where there's high deficit and debt, to let us put our money forward, loan with them, bond against our future dollars that we have, in our own systems, and create a million jobs now. That took them, what, 5 years, 4 years to, I think it was 4 years to pass. It's a broken system up there. And we're much more willing, ready to work across the aisle, to chart a middle path than you see in Washington, where everybody's pointing fingers and screaming at one another and getting very little done. So I think that's why cities are, when we just said, we produce 90% of the GDP. If you took my city, the metropolitan area, it's the 17th largest economy in the world, everybody. If you took New York, LA, and Chicago, we have an economy the size of France. If you took the top 10 cities, and you're in it, if you took the top 10 cities, we're a third of the GDP of the country. You would never know that in Washington. I call them the kings and the queens. When you go and talk to the Senate, they act like you're some country, I don't want to use the word, but they treat you.
They don't roll out the red carpet for you.
Yeah, no. Well, and you're running a country, and you're trying to partner with them, and it's so difficult, and it's it's broken, more. I think, in my opinion, it's more broken on the right. And Norm Ornstein, I hear, is here, and he talks about that in his book. It's more broken on the right, but it's broken on the left too. I mean, CEQA. I'm a big environmentalist. I have a record.
You have to explain that.
CEQA is what is it? It's what's.
Environmental Quality Act?
It's basically the laws around which you have to do environmental impacts. Yeah, you have to do an environmental impact for virtually everything you build. It's broken. It's almost impossible.
That's not federal, though.
It's federal.
But it's state
and then
by
we
state.
have state too.
Yeah.
And then we have them on top of one another. And ours is more stringent than theirs, but we have to do theirs and ours, and we can't do them together, although we're starting to change that. But I think what you see in cities is mayors much more willing to roll up their sleeves and get things done. We don't walk in, I was joking last night at dinner, we don't walk into the green room and the kitchen. I like to go in the kitchen afterwards, but we try to shake everybody's hand in a room. People knock on your door. I live at Getty House with a gate, and people are knocking on my door about potholes and screaming at you because you haven't done something. You're much closer to people, and so I think much less focused on ideology and orthodoxy.
I want to ask about quality of life, but Annise, you wanted to get in on that.
No, cities have to function 24/7 at a very, very high level. That's why we don't have time. You can debate the Federalist Papers. You can talk about the history of democracy in America. No one cares. They want their trash picked up. They want their water to flow. They don't want their sewer pipes to break. We don't have time to slow down for those kinds of things. Cities are immediate. But you also have to take the long view in cities. And I will give a compliment that many of the different areas of the Obama administration have reached out. As Mitch has said, I want to do something differently. Houston has had tremendous problems with HUD over the years. It's totally dysfunctional relationship. We're always sending money back.
Housing and urban development.
Housing and urban development. How do we not do that again? They gave me technical assistance. They embedded people. We're fixing it. Great new relationship with Federal Transit Administration. They get it. But I'm still trying to recover from Ike. You mentioned Katrina and Rita. There's $100 million of Ike funding sitting in the state capitol. I have a $4 billion budget. I know where that money needs to go. Don't send it to Austin, where they can play politics with it. Send it to me and let me spend it. It's 4.5 years since Ike. I have people who still have blue tarps. Give me the money, let me spend it. Hold us accountable for spending it, but don't fund the big cities directly, because we're where the people are and we know what to do with it.
And I know, Mayor Landrieu, you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to this issue. First of all, the essential truth is that mayors are responsible for making it work. And when you're responsible for making it work, you don't have as much time to think about large theoretical issues or philosophical issues, because no mayor governs in theory. We govern in practice. And that's why we are forced to be much less ideological. All of us, I'm sure, come to our offices as Republicans or Democrats. You may have come as a conservative or a liberal, and then you end up somewhere in the middle, much like the Supreme Court's lurching to at this point in time. You see that happening, right? And so that's why when we meet as mayors, there really is not the kind of philosophical butting of heads that we witness in watching Congress argue with itself. And I would just have to say respectfully, when I watch them, it sounds to me that what they're speaking about is so far away from what we do that it makes me think either they're out of touch or we don't know what we're doing. Now, or maybe there's something in between. But for example, this kind of notion that cuts do not have consequences is a lie. Now, it may be philosophically true that the government's got to get smaller. How it gets smaller, whether it gets smaller by a hammer or whether it gets smaller by a scalpel, has real meaning to us in real time. It works just like this because it rolls downhill. Congress makes a decision not to do something about health care. There have to be cuts. Kathleen Sebelius sends a note down to the state that, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have funding for Medicaid, or because of a decision the state made, they're not going to do a certain thing. And then the governor decides, or somebody on his staff decides, they're not going to fund a piece of the Medicaid budget that provided rides to the doctor for folks that were quadriplegics and paraplegics. It's called paratransit. When they decide not to do that, a city that doesn't have power to go force them to do something else or can't move Congress to change their mind, all of a sudden has a $14 million deficit. And when you have a $14 million deficit, this is how that works. How many cops am I going to lay off? How many firemen am I going to lay off if I want to go pick up the people? Now, if we want to leave the individual that was maybe a vet that was a quadriplegic on the street and not provide paratransit to them to get to the doctor for the health care that we promised them, for the sacrifice that they made to us, I guess that's a philosophical discussion that we can make. But you see, we're not in that business down on the ground. All we know is we got somebody sitting on the corner in a wheelchair, and they're not getting to the doctor, and they eventually could die. Or we have to make a real-life decision that day. These are real-life choices. Is it going to be Joe, who's in the fire department, Susie, that's in the police department, or are we going to lay off the coach in the recreation department? And so that philosophical discussion up there gets to us to be a real personal discussion, and since we know all the people, right, we're forced to come up with decisions, or at least ideas, that don't have room for philosophical debate. Now, we have those from time to time, but I can tell you, as a good Democrat that believes the government can be a real good active partner, I can tell you that I've taken some very conservative approaches to solving a problem because the private sector approach made much difference, like our health care. When I got there, our health department was actually delivering primary care. As a result of a bunch of other stuff going on the federal level and our desire to get ahead of health care reform, we created 88 primary health care clinics that are now treating 350 people. So the Mary Buck Health Clinic, which is on Magazine Street, where folks from New Orleans know, is now providing 350 mammograms a month to poor women that otherwise would not have gotten screened before. So when I got to City Hall, I said, well, why in City Hall do I have people on my payroll, providing primary care when we have the not-for-profit and the private sector doing it? So I downsized. I let those people go and then moved them into the area, which was let the private sector and the not-for-profit sector do something because they could do it better than us. And we do that every day, all day, balancing private approaches, not-for-profit approaches, and then there's some instances where we say, you know what, government's got to do this better and faster than everybody else and do it more efficiently because the scale is so vast that the private sector either has decided for market purposes they won't do it, or the not-for-profits have said we can't sustain this thing over time, or the philanthropic community said we'll help a little bit and plug a hole, but we can't do a lot. And so when we operate in that kind of practical environment, we get very, very frustrated that Washington says, well, we can't get to it right now. So the street can crumble, the health care can wait, the transportation can slow down, the wall time, I want y'all to understand what that is. Wall time means somebody on a bed that got taken to the emergency room, the amount of time they wait for a doctor on the wall before they can come, wall time gets longer. And the emergency, folks that are bringing them wind up getting backed up, and then the emergency response time gets longer, and then people get hurt. Those are the kind of real-life things we deal with, and that's why we get frustrated that Washington can't come to some answer. I think what we would say to them is, just answer the question. At some point in time, just get to an answer, and we'll deal with the rest of it.
I want to ask you, we're going to bring the audience in just a minute. We have people who have microphones on either side of the room, so just raise your hand and they'll make their way to you. But I want to ask you about quality of life issues, because when you talk about renewing cities, there's all kinds of metrics that you can measure, and statistics and data and money spent on one thing or another, but there's something that's harder to measure, and it's called quality of life. Do people want to come back to the city to live? Well, businesses locate to the city because they think their workforce will enjoy living and working and lunching in the city. And much of that comes down, that quality of life comes down to the schools. And I just want to share a statistic that seems to haunt me. I've been to 3 different conferences this year where this single statistic has been uttered, and you probably are all aware of this. But the prison industrial complex, when they're trying to decide how many prisons they need to build, will look at the test scores of a city's 3rd grade population. Yes. And if the test scores in the 3rd grade are quite low, they know that they need to start building more prisons and start building a pipeline of guards and cooks and everything else they need in the prison industrial complex. Every time I hear this statistic, it's like a stab to my heart. So when you talk about quality of life in the city, it really does come down to building a viable school system. And yet that is the thing that cities seem to struggle most with.
No question about it. The other area that we've taken on, seniority and tenure among teachers. I run 22 schools, 18,000 kids. I tried to partner with the schools. I went to Sacramento. I got legislation passed giving the mayor that right. School district sued. We spent $1 million. We lost on trial court and appeal. I then had to elect a school board and raise $6 million, most expensive school board races ever, to challenge the union that. And I worked for them for 8 years. I'm not anti-union. But I was challenging this monopoly they had where they put the interest of adults and not kids first. And we've seen in the last 7 years, and it's been a battle royale, we've doubled the number of schools that are hitting 800. That's what the state requires, 800 on the Academic Performance Index in LA Unified. We've reduced from 33% to 10% the failing schools at 650 and below. We've doubled the number of charter schools in LA, and we have more charters than any city in the country.
Do the charter schools outperform traditional schools?
And we've quintupled the number of charter schools that are at 800 and above. So we have, the answer is it's mixed.
Because people assume that charter schools are a panacea.
Yeah, and the answer is it's mixed.
They're great charter schools, and they're terrible charter schools that are worse than any public school you could ever be in.
It's mixed. There's no question about it. But what we've done in LA is we're innovating, and we're forcing failing schools through a process called public school choice. If the school's failing or a brand new school, we're closing them down. We're saying that they're going to have to compete for an operator. We're going to give parents choices. So we're starting to see some steady progress. But California is going to be, if these taxes that Governor Brown has put forth fail, and it looks like it may, we're going to be below Mississippi. We're going to be 50th in per pupil spending. Now, this is where I challenge the right. I've been challenging the left on seniority and tenure. I've done lawsuits to stop them from laying off people just based on seniority in the poor schools. I've done a number of things challenging the left. But where I challenge the right is, this idea that money doesn't matter, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous idea. A lot of the folks in here, I imagine your kids were at private schools. My daughter was at Marlboro, a great public school. My son was at Loyola. Let me tell you, money matters. You know, you got to invest in our schools. When you're 50th in per pupil spending, when you're dead last in counselors and librarians and technology in the classroom, like we are in California right now, you're going to have failing schools. But what I said to the left is, we've got a challenge. We got to spend more money, but we got to connect money to success and results. And that's really where I think Sacramento's broken like Washington, because they're, you know, the Dems always want more money, and the Republicans don't want to spend any money. They just want results, and you got to have both. And that's where we're different. You know, we recognize, there's a middle ground, and the debate around reforming our schools and improving them is a polarized debate. And we've got to bring it back to the middle, back to results, but back to making investments that count.
Mayor Landrieu, is that the key to rebuilding New Orleans, rebuilding the city schools?
Well, first of all, the question was about quality of life, and that's a big issue. That's about aesthetics. It's about style. It's about architecture. It's about food. It's about culture. I think a lot of people are moving back to the inner cities because they're cultural hubs. Yeah. And of course, New Orleans has a ton of that. Los Angeles has a ton of it. New York, and actually, my message to the rest of the country is that every little nook and cranny, every hamlet has an indigenous and authentic culture that, if treated like it produces jobs, by the way, which it does. And in Louisiana, for example, our cultural economy has 144,000 jobs. It's a $14 billion piece of our economy. I mean, the men and women around here that are waiting on you, right? The people that are driving you all around, the folks that are working in your hotels, there are a lot of jobs. And there are a lot of high-paying jobs in beautiful Aspen. That I don't know how many of you went to the concert last night. Spectacular. Every one of those musicians is a professional. They're all small businesses. The cultural economy is huge. And I think that you see cities really trying to do a lot. And by the way, we have green spaces in the city too. And so this is a gorgeous area, but cities really are thinking back now about, you know, what a Central Park in their city would look like, or in New Orleans, a City Park, or an Audubon. But when you get down to the essence of the quality of life, I think most people that have children would say the most important thing in their life is for that child to have an opportunity to have a better life than their parent had. And the fact of the matter is that families have to raise children. No matter how good the government gets and how effective it gets, parents are ultimately responsible for the welfare and the education of their children. And that has gotten disconnected. Now, I've had a big argument with Paul Vallis, who I think is spectacular. And I think a lot of the new models in education reform, those particularly going on in New Orleans, have indicated that even children from tough families, single mother households, if they get the kids early enough, and I mean early in the morning, and they stay late enough, I mean late in the afternoon, and I also mean early childhood education, if they get them at 3 to 5, then even in the most difficult circumstances, you can teach a child and give them a great education. The mayor told you that the mayors compete with each other. That's right. When I got to be the mayor, I looked around the country, who were the greatest mayors? Let me go learn from them and steal all their good ideas, and we compete with each other. So I go back home and I say, look, Mayor Anthony's doing something good. I want to beat him. Whatever he's doing, let's do something better. So, Mr. Mayor, I have to tell you, it may be that you guys have more charter schools, but in New Orleans, and I don't think this exists anywhere else in the country, 80% of our kids are in charter schools. So in New York, you have 1.2 million kids. They have, I don't know, 2 or 3%. And I agree with Annise. The charter schools in New Orleans are working very, very well. But it is not the charter itself. What it sets up is a framework where a number of different principles are allowed to flourish. And if the principles are fairly clear, which is that you have school-based autonomy. In other words, the principal is the boss, right? When you have the ability to hire and fire based on merit, when you have some way to measure their success, and then you have enrichment programs, and maybe there are 1 or 2 other principles that float in between that. Whatever school that's governed by the public schools or the charter schools or the private school, that school is showing great progress. It just so happens that in New Orleans, we have really moved aggressively because we were able to a complete charter movement. So we don't have a school system anymore. We have a system of schools that are independently run and that is showing great progress. I can't honestly tell you that it's the only way to do it. What we're trying in New Orleans seems to be working. There's a lot of controversy that surrounds it. There's some tenure issues that surround it. There's some other issues about authenticity and who got fired and who didn't. But by and large, if you stay focused on the thing that matters, which is our kids learning better and learning more, the piece in New Orleans is working well, and it is absolutely the most essential component that has been missing. And if we don't get that right, then cities are never going to succeed. You have to get that right in order for us all to do well.
Let's bring in the audience. There's a question right here, a gentleman in a red shirt. He's smack in the center of the room.
I'm Todd Martin. I'm a fifth-generation Californian who emigrated to Texas. I'm glad I don't have to pay California taxes anymore. My question is to you, Mayor Villaraigosa. There is an elephant in the room, and that is the cascading bankruptcy of cities in California. And my specific question to you is, what are you doing about, like, you speak to it generally, and then specifically, what are you doing about government employee entitlements? And what are you doing about growing businesses and competitiveness to generate revenues that way?
Well, first of all, Cascading is, there are two cities, Vallejo and now Stockton. So it's not, there are a lot more cities in California, I think of more than 1,000 cities. People have talked about my city going bankrupt, and in fact, that's the first time I've used that word. I never used the word. I've said over my dead body, and let me tell you what we've done. I've cut a third of the LA General Fund civilian workforce, a third. I've, in the worst economy since the 1930s. I joke with Governor Christie, everybody's talking about how he got his employees to go from 7% to 12% for 7 years. I got mine to go from 6 to 11% contribution rate to the retirement forever, permanently. And I'm now proposing that we raise the retirement age to 67 and connect it to Social Security. I'm a Democrat, but I've been challenging what's broken on the left and on the right, and you hit it. I'll be 60 in January. I work out every day. I'm fairly healthy. We're living till we're 80-something, you know? And you can't pay people for the, 100% or even 90% of their salary from 55 to 90. It's just, or 85. It's not sustainable. San Diego, San Jose have just passed some pension reform. I think theirs will be illegal because in California, unfortunately, you can't take away a vested right. You can in other states, but I think ultimately theirs will be illegal. I had to negotiate mine, but I did. We're also trying to, you said entitlements, and we're also addressing benefits. I have a situation where employees don't pay a penny for health care. And all I'm saying is, let's start at 10%. I mean, we all you got to have, skin in the game. And, it's been a battle, because in LA, I'll be honest, probably more than any of the other two cities here, the unions are very powerful. They don't want to compromise on a lot of these issues. And I'm moving forward. We're going to do it. And we're going to do it because we have to.
And the second part of
the
that
business,
question.
yeah, the second part is the business part. What have we done? Early on, we reduced our gross receipts tax because it's among the highest in the region. We've made it easier for internet companies to come in LA. We're actually focused a lot on clean tech because we've done so much in sustainability. LA is the clean tech capital of the United States, and we're really drawing in, working with USC, UCLA, and Caltech to bring in more clean tech companies, more high-tech companies to Venice. We move 44%. I mean, when I tell you we're a country, we move 44% of all your goods. Everything that enters the United States, 44% of them come through our port. So we're really focused on growing the port. We have the number 1 or 2 destination airport. So we've $4 billion there, 40,000 jobs, $3 billion at the port, 20,000 jobs. I brought Xi Jinping, the vice president of China, who's going to be the next president, to the port to kind of sell why the port's so important. And then finally, what we're doing is we're really developing the LA brand. I said that the problem with LA is it still kind of thinks of itself in some levels
like we were that sleepy town in the 1950s. Well, we're not. So we're going to fashion. We're going to design and architecture. We're going to a lot of groups and really trying to develop the LA brand. Because the people, it used to be, not only people used to leave the city. If you look at the ring around at the city of LA, all the companies would go around that ring. Now we're bringing a lot of them back. Because we're saying,
Mayor,
we want to develop
that's interesting. That's
the
something
LA brand.
you hear a lot from mayors. Mayor Emanuel talks a lot about that, is building the Chicago brand, because whether people live in Winnetka or whether they live in one of the southern suburbs, when you ask them where they're from, if they're
They'll
overseas,
always say the
they
city.
always say Chicago.
Even though they
So
don't live there.
Yeah. they
That's
talk
exactly
about
right.
So, Antonio, you know the single biggest source of jobs in Houston is California. Just so you know.
I do know. I do know.
that. Let's see,
I
there was
do
a striped shirt. Did he? Oh, he's vacated. Okay, we have a question right here in the front. And actually, we'll take you next, since you're right there and your hand is up, and then we'll make
Lucky
our way.
me. On Saturday, General McChrystal...
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm David Jones from Louisville, Kentucky. And on Saturday, General McChrystal identified failing schools as the #1 threat to our national security. My question for the mayors is, can public schools be turned around without mayoral control?
I sincerely hope so, since I don't have mayoral control.
I don't think so. I think you need somebody in charge. When you have school board members, all of them beholden to usually one interest, they're not going...
You mean someone, not the superintendent?
Yeah.
Someone in
Yeah,
the mayor's office, meaning the mayor.
Most school districts are run by a superintendent with a school board. You're just not seeing the kind of reform in those places, particularly in the urban
the
schools.
business community on those school boards.
Yeah, that's
Let's
right.
be frank, the quality of school board members leaves a lot to be desired.
Lot to be
If the
desired.
business community really cares about schools, CEOs would be sitting on those school boards, not the lowest common denominator.
Now, there is not yet strong evidence that mayoral takeovers lead to increased
Can I
quality
speak to that
or
issue for a second?
or
In the
success
city,
in schools.
well, let me give you our experience in New Orleans. Before Katrina hit, remember I said Katrina didn't cause all of our problems. It didn't make our school system bad. It was bad before the storm hit. And before the storm hit, the state of Louisiana and the city of New Orleans were having a big argument about failing schools. Now, the state came into the city and seized the schools that were failing, took them over, and created a governmental structure called the Recovery School District. It's basically an autocracy. The way it works is that the governor has a board of the elementary and secondary education, statewide board, and they hire somebody that runs all of the schools. That person hires the individual that runs the Recovery School District, and that person only answers to, the gal or the guy on the state level. And so what happened was, after Katrina hit, all of the employees for the school system were laid off, every one of them. And then we went to restructuring what the school system looked like. And so we went into these charter schools. A ton of kids from TFA came in, a whole bunch of kids that
TFA.
otherwise would
Explain
I'm
what
sorry,
TFA
Teach
is.
for America.
Teach for America.
So Teach for America, in my opinion, is a great organization. You have
Yes,
kids
it
that
is.
otherwise would have gone to law school, or they would have gone to work on Wall Street. They're all graduates of Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, or other schools, and they've all basically said, I want to dedicate some of my life to teaching kids. It's a great model, and it works really well. I'm partial to it because my daughter just got finished teaching 2 years in the 9th Ward at a school called Miller McCoy. But in any event, what has happened with this autocratic structure, this is what we're going to do, this is when we're going to do it, this is how we're going to do it, and we're not going to stop until your scores get this high, and if your scores don't get this high, then we're going to change. There has been great progress going forward. I will say, though, that there is a political conflict because the people of New Orleans now want to govern their own schools in some form or fashion, and I would agree with you. There are some examples where strong mayoral control has worked. Now, that could be the mayor and the city council, or it could be some kind of new board that the mayor's got half appointments on and the school board's got half appointments on. Whatever that turns out to be, I would say that the essential principle is that somebody has got to be accountable.
Yeah.
There's got to be somebody that the public can hold accountable for getting it done or not getting it done. And whatever structure is set up
Hold
has to
accountable
reflect that.
via the ballot box?
Well, this is what, I was in the legislature before I became the lieutenant governor and then the mayor, and this is the way it used to work. When we ran for office, people said, what are you going to do about education? And we all said what we were going to do. And then it didn't happen, and they came to us, and we said, well, I didn't merely mean that. We kind of give the budget, but Bessie's the one that does it. And Bessie would say, well, it really wasn't us. It was really the school board. The school board said it really wasn't us. It was somebody else. And then there was Ring Around the Rosie. There's got to be somebody that can be held accountable for the progress of the school. And in some instances, you've seen mayoral control work, and in some you haven't, but they're not all designed the same way. So it's like charter schools are not. It's the principles of governing that matter more than the absolute structure. And if it takes you, in a lot of instances, though, when we're in emergencies, we have autocracies, and there's a general, right? Like General McChrystal, he can tell people what to do, and they have to do it. In a democratic society, it's not always that easy. You have to go ask council members if they'll vote for something. And if they're not beholden to you, they'll say, well, my constituents tell me what to do, and then you get into a little tete-a-tete. It takes a little bit longer, and it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, it's not just mayoral control. It's a lot of things. It's Common Core standards. It's uplifting the quality of teaching. It's holding, the school community accountable. It's a strong principal in every school. It's good superintendents that focus on learning. It's money tied to results. There's a broad.
It's more hours in the classroom, and it's better parenting and
all of that.
On the front end.
It's a big, complex recipe. Let's take another question. You put in my mind, though, a thought of, what if General McChrystal ran a school system? Wouldn't that be?
Well, we actually tried that in LA with an admiral, and
Turn
it
those
didn't work.
teachers' unions loose.
It didn't work. We tried it.
If we have a question right here, and then I saw one right over here. Good.
Good morning. My name is Margie Winters, and I work for Mayor Bing, managing the Planning and Development Department in the city of Detroit. So first, thank you all for leading big cities. I'm sure you all are intimately familiar with the problem of the aging municipal workforce, and just wanted to hear about the ways in which you are working to ensure that people who are young, educated, and innovative want to work in the public sector in the future.
That's a great question.
You want me to take that?
Lisa, why don't you take that?
Lisa?
Well, I can't speak on the municipal level as much as just the aging public sector workforce, and sadly, a generation of extraordinarily talented people who are coming out, and the message, and this I think is extraordinarily corrosive, is that public workers are a waste of space. I mean, and I'm being obviously somewhat inflammatory there. It's really hard to go out and recruit people when the message they're getting writ large from, by the way, our elected leaders in the public sector is that the workers who actually make government work aren't worth investing in. So we have to, I think, and the president says this all the time. He says, listen, I think government should be very efficient, but don't get me wrong. We need people to administer these programs. So I think what we have to do is speak to what young people, being the mother of a 16 and 17-year-old, that's my expertise here, but what attracts them. And it's entrepreneurial accomplishment to some degree. It's the ability to think outside, which all these mayors talk to some degree, and not have it shut down by a system that says that's not the way we do things. You heard the frustration just from these leaders on what happens when you run up against that bureaucratic moment. And I'm sure it happens, respectfully, at the municipal level, where people feel like they go to their municipal government and the answer they get is, can't do it, that's not how we do it, we used to do it like this, and that's the way.
Fill out this form.
Right, fill out this form and then go 3 different places, and oh, by the way, which is why I love that you have them all going to one place. That's a cool idea just by itself. So I think we have to think the way they do and find ways to use technology, social media to communicate and inform and inspire them to come in with, it would also help if we get to the point, some new equilibrium where we say, yes, we have a leaner, meaner, more efficient government, but we need that government desperately. And that's a part of the political dialogue that's really somewhat terrifying to me. I also went to Tulane and Princeton, came out, decided I wanted to be a public sector worker, been a public sector worker for 20 plus years. And it's really hard when my employees look at me and say, don't they get how hard, how many nights we work, how hard we work, what we do? We are the people that work when things go wrong. So there's weight in the system, there's efficiency, we absolutely have to get more efficient, but we need to change that dialogue. When we get to the point where we fix the problem, one of the things that frustrates me, when you have leaders who are working hard, taking on their normal constituencies to fix some of these inefficiencies in the system, they're not getting any help from from one side, and the other side is continuing to criticize. There needs to be a recognition of a new normal, and then we need to rally around that.
We had a question right here.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for all of your comments. I've learned so much from you guys today. My name is Olga Camargo, and I'm actually here from Chicago, Illinois. And I'm active in my community on the different levels, ground level, city level, and other stuff. But I've received a lot of questions from the people that I've worked with, and I'm here to pose that question to you today. What are you doing to promote growth within small businesses? Because we all know that that's right now a pressing need in our nation, and that is the single largest engine to job creation. Thank you.
You know, we lost, as Annise said, a lot of Fortune 500 companies to Texas, to Houston, to other cities. But we're still the epicenter of small business, and by far. LA has more small businesses than New York, than Chicago, and disproportionately, they're immigrants. And that was the thing we didn't mention, is the diversity of our cities. And I should have said it. I mean, let me, when I tell you a country, LA, we come from 140 countries. We speak 200 languages. We have 37 nationalities that have their largest population in LA outside of their country of origin. We're 42% foreign born, about 48% Latino. 74% of LA comes from Latin America, Asia, and Africa.
Did you say 42% foreign born?
42% foreign born. And disproportionately, those businesses are immigrants. I mean, disproportionately. Koreans, Chinese, Mexicans, Salvadorans, Armenians, Iranians. You know, there's an energy in LA in the small business community. So we put together an Office of Small Business. You would think even under the Republican mayor a couple of years back, we'd never had an Office of Small Business. We're focused on small businesses.
And what do you do specifically to help?
Well, cut red tape, provide access to capital, connect them. I just left a 500 small business owners, Korean and Latino, coming together because we're trying to create synergies around exporting. We're focused on exports with small businesses, but we're connecting them, Koreans who are exporting to Korea, Mexicans who are exporting to Mexico, we're connecting them to do like, you know.
You're helping create trade routes for them.
Creating new trade routes and new markets. We're cutting, as I said, red tape. We're helping them export. You know, those are some of the things that we're doing. But we are very focused. We're working with Goldman Sachs on 10,000 and UBS both. They're in New York and Chicago and in LA with their small business expansion program. So those are some of the things we're doing. We're really focused on that. This is where the wealth is getting created in LA. It's not in the big companies. It's in these small little, you know, they're working 16 hours a day creating wealth and really adding to the LA economy.
We only have time for maybe a couple more questions.
And we're all doing some of these same things. And
In the
Antonio
back with
likes to
the-
brag about LA. I could say all of the same
Yeah.
things in Houston. And it's cheaper to live in Houston. And I will point out
And it's hotter.
that we are the fastest, we are the hottest regional economy in the United States right now. And we're 20% foreign born in Houston, and just a mecca for those who come for the American dream.
Yes, they do.
And you have a large.
It's really
small
hot to
business
live in
community
there.
yesterday.
Very
Boy.
large small business.
Man.
Yeah, but I have a lot more money to spend on air conditioning.
You know, if you have ever been to a conference of mayors,
have a
as
lot
I
more
have,
money.
they really are
We're
very
all Goldman
Can I-
Sachs
can I-
10,000 small business cities.
I want to
too.
explain this program. This is a really great job creator. All three of our cities are doing it. Goldman Sachs, so you big private sector, public sector, education. We all were thinking about how do you create a framework for actually growing jobs. There's economic development. You try to entice a big company to come in and bring a whole bunch of jobs. And there's economic growth. How do you grow jobs from the ground up? This is where most of the businesses start in America. And Goldman Sachs is doing something in all three of our cities, which is a great program. They basically said, listen, what's one of the biggest problems for small businesses? Knowledge, learning how to do stuff, and then access to capital. And so what they did was they said, we want to create a partnership with you. And this is kind of what the partnership looks like, recognizing that the linchpin are our technical schools, our VOTEC schools. And so they came in and they said, what we'll do is we'll bring in folks that will work with your community colleges, and we will give them a curriculum for basically a mini MBA for small business owners. Now, we're not going to let anybody in this. You got to have skin in the game. So we want a business owner that's got 2 years of experience, really put their own capital up and their own risk. And what we'll do is we'll bring them in. We'll screen, 200 folks. We'll pick a class of 30. And then we will send them through this executive MBA in our city, in Delgado Community College. And they go for 6 months. Now, think about this. 30 small businesses been out there really working hard, whether it's somebody that demolishes housing or is reconstructing houses or is doing green work or whatever it is that they're doing. And they sit in a classroom with 30 like-minded people, and they do it over 6 months. And then when they graduate, what happens is Goldman Sachs has made available to them in New Orleans, the numbers are probably different in your cities, $20 million in capital. And the fact that they graduated from the business means that they are ready to be lent money to. And what's happened is each one of those small businesses has added 4, 5, 6 people to their businesses. So just think about it, 30 times 5, 180, all of a sudden you have 180 new jobs just over a 6-month period of time. And that's replicating itself across the city. But it had all 3 components.
From the city as
Yeah.
well.
We want to make sure that we get to another question. What's interesting about
Works
that,
really, really well.
that program also is if you
Beautiful.
match it against a traditional MBA class at, say, Wharton or, an Ivy League school, the profile is
These
obviously
people who
quite
already
different.
know what
And
the
so,
real world is like.
yeah.
They're not just living up here.
Yeah,
It's very interesting.
works really well.
Hi, my name is Mira Rubel, and I'm from Miami. And let's see, about not too long ago, when people said they were from Miami, you'd think of Miami Vice, drugs, weapons, maybe, and sun, I guess. Today, talking about branding cities, I just want to say what I'm so proud of. Miami, when you think about it, has become a cultural destination. So for all the problems that we're talking about, things that are bad with cities, I'm actually very proud that a city can move into an identity of being a cultural destination. So you haven't, and by the way, when you talk about a cultural destination, I'm thinking jobs, I'm thinking money, I'm thinking selling condos. People want to live there because,
Yes, ma'am.
and during the hardest times, the citizens of Miami voted for a museum. I think a $200 million bond that passed with citizens' vote. So I know whenever there's I guess it's, I just want to say that usually when there's a culture art seminar, people show up that are only interested in culture. I think let's start thinking of culture as creating huge jobs.
That's
I
a
love you
great
for
thought.
that.
You
Yeah.
also have one heck of a basketball team in Miami. We had time for one last question. It was right over
I want
over
to say
here.
amen to that. You're absolutely right.
Hi, I'm Meg Withgett. I'm from an industry with jobs. And I want to ask you, so UCLA has been forced to cut its budget. LSU cut computer science as an independent department this year. Meanwhile, we need newly minted engineers, designers. Can you, as mayors, help convince your states about the importance of higher education?
Have you met my governor?
No. Not personally, no.
Forget I said that.
And that's part of the challenge. I mean, we few of you and Annise talked about California. I mean, LA doesn't live in a vacuum. We're in California. Our tax system is broken. There's an over-reliance on the upper income tax. Our corporate tax is too high. We should be Prop 13 is broken. There's a lot of things going on at the state that impact our ability to create jobs. And so what's happening in California today, they're not only disinvesting in K through 12, they're disinvesting in the UCs, which were always, the starship, of public education, higher education. It was always the standard, and it's now going down. They're now at 7% of the state pays 7% of the UC budget, but they want 90% of the control.
When we talk
It is.
about higher education, though, should we also be talking about community colleges? Because
Yes.
isn't that
Absolutely.
sort of the engine of
Absolutely.
growth in
And-
cities as well?
Absolutely.
There's what's the clearest and easiest way to say this? It is possible for government simultaneously to be too big and spending too much money and not investing more money in the right stuff.
Yes.
That's the state of affairs that we have right now. That does not invite a debate about whether government should be bigger or smaller, but that's the debate that we have right now, and it seems to be stuck in that. You have to take a multi-dimensional approach to this. I would say this: the world's getting smaller, finances are getting tighter, we can't spend as much money as we used to, and government, in many, many instances, I think all of us would agree, is bureaucratic, it's too slow, doesn't go fast enough, doesn't produce as good a result as people want it to. And when we create a model that does that, people will invest in it. That's been my experience in any event. And so one of the things that we have to do is you have to cut with a scalpel, not a hatchet. And then you have to reinvest those savings in the things that matter. And I think there's nobody in this room that would disagree that the United States of America, in order to maintain her position in the world, has got to invest in what is necessary to create a knowledge-based economy. And higher education is the main engine for that. That doesn't mean that we need as many university systems as we have all over the world. And it doesn't mean that we don't need to invest in community college, but we have to have a smart way to approach that and not continue to dumb down over time just because there's
we need to think
I
about
love
our
that you
community
said
college
her
not
place
as
in
not
the
as the
world.
last resort for people who can't cut it someplace else.
Right.
We need people. We need people in the trades. We need people who can work with their hands. We need people who can run the small businesses that do our electrical and do our plumbing and fix our cars as well. And we're not investing in, if we don't invest in our community colleges, we're not investing in that.
This gentleman was one of the first people to raise his hand, so this truly is the last question, right here.
Thank you very much. Steve McCormick, fifth generation Californian, still paying taxes, and not moving to Houston.
I'm not living in Houston.
You should try it.
I've been there. You all spoke very persuasively about the role you play in dealing with immediate needs. So real issues with real people in real time. But I'm wondering, what would it take in the theme of a renewable city or a livable city to create a vision for your city 15, 20 years out, where you said, this is where we want to be, in all the dimensions: schools, jobs, housing, transportation, open space, sustainability, and establish some real goals, and then enlist key leaders in the community to rally behind that. The business community, I know the foundation community, I work for the big foundation, would rally behind it. Get everybody in the city feeling a sense of commitment and role in realizing that vision.
You assume that we could have ever.
We don't have a lot of time. So
You
I'm
assume
gonna
we
ask you
could
to
have
just
ever
give us a
gotten
short
elected
answer if
without
you
doing
can.
that. Every one of us has articulated a vision for our city. I spoke at the beginning about investing in infrastructure. I took to the voters 2 years ago a drainage fee for the city of Houston. It was a really, if you picked a worse election, I don't know what it would have been. Tea Party dominated, anti-government, throw the bums out. And I went to the voters of Houston and said, I need to create a new fee so we can pay for drainage in the city of Houston. And this is why. Because we're a city prone to flooding, we're built on the flat coastal prairie, I need this, and we articulated completely why it was important, and lo and behold, the voters of Houston voted for that. And now I have $125 million more money a year to put into streets and drainage in the city of Houston. I'm going to be going to the voters this November and talk about a bioconnectivity, Bayou from Louisiana, connecting a continuous trail system along our Bayou system to create linear parks so that virtually every Houstonian will be within a half a mile or a mile and a half of a park system, and we can have a continuous trail system so I can commute by bicycle anywhere in the city of Houston. We are all articulating visions for the future in our own cities, or we wouldn't be where we are.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming out this morning. This has been a